Eleanor Smeal has devoted her life to issues related to women's rights. She's an internationally recognized leader and political analyst. Eleanor has been pivotal in organizing landmark women's rights marches, which have drawn hundreds of thousands to our nation's capital. Dr. Smeal is currently president of the Feminist Majority Foundation and is the recipient of an honorary Doctorate of Humane Letters degree from Rutgers University. Welcome to the show. First of all, thank you very much for joining us. It's an honor to have you.
That's good. It's good to be here.
It's not a chance every day that I get to sit across from somebody who has been really involved with changing history. And your bio and your kind of accomplishments really speak to that. So why don't we jump right in and be able to talk about that. 60s, 70s, you were really active with the conversation of women's rights. So can you talk a little bit about our history, kind of how you got involved in that and kind of what you did through that area?
Well, especially the 70s and the 80s too. There were so many things. Job discrimination cases. We challenged everything from the want ads. They used to be help wanted male, female, and we got them integrated with a lawsuit, which was my home chapter of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that took it against the Pittsburgh Press. And I had to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and we only won in 1974 by one vote, 5-4.
Okay.
But the next day, almost, they integrated. And most kids don't even know what happened. But we challenged in tenure for professors. We challenged that in the telephone company didn't hire, women were only the operators, not the line people. The police officers, grocery store workers, essentially a lot of employment cases. And then we got very involved in sex discrimination education, helped pass Title IX, made sure it was enforced. And open the doors. I mean, there were quotas against us in most of the professional schools. Now, we are by 7% of the lawyers in law school. Today, we're approximately 50%. So it's a big change. But that didn't just come. We sued, picketed. When I say we, the feminist movement is, and I was very much a part of the Title IX fight, still am. I mean, we've had to defend it for 35 years.
So let's go back and define two things, because I think it's interesting. They have lots of connotations. You brought up the word feminist. I think there are lots of different perspectives around what a feminist is. From your perspective, what is a feminist and how does it fit in today's society?
Well, it's easy. It's either a woman or a man, boy or girl, who believes in equality between the sexes and advocates it for it. And so that's it. It's equality. And I have a broader definition in my own mind, because I think it's a person really who believes in social justice, who really doesn't believe in any kinds of discrimination on race or ethnicity, or a person who would be for gay marriage, or giving everybody an equal chance. And so it's inclusive. And I sort of think of Jane Addams, who was one of the first feminists, and that was at the turn of the 20th century, who fought for the poor. She started the settlement houses. She fought for peace. Fighting for peace seems like it doesn't quite go. Yeah, right. But essentially, it was for humanity to have it a better break.
And the other issue you brought up, I don't know if a lot of our viewers know about what Title IX is, and what its mission's supposed to be, what it's supposed to accomplish, and kind of what the entree is in terms of the legislation.
Right. Well, it's a piece of federal legislation passed in 1972 that says you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex in federally funded educational programs. And since most of the colleges in our country receive federally funded, I would say all of them virtually, they can't discriminate in admission or in programming. In other words, you have to admit you don't have to admit equal numbers. You have to give equal opportunity to men and women. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex. The reason we needed Title IX is when the Civil Rights Act was passed in the mid-60s, and the educational part of it were included in the employment section of which is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. But in the Title VI, it didn't include sex discrimination. So we had to pass a special act in '72. Then it took us 3 years to get regulations. And then under the Reagan administration challenged it. And we lost a a very important lawsuit, which was the Grove City case, which essentially gutted Title IX. So then I was a part of the core to restore it, so that it covered, if any part of an institution receives federal funding, the entire institution cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. What the Reagan administration argued is only that part of the institution that actually got the money cannot discriminate.
All right.
So anyway, we got rid of that. It's institution-wide.
I'm trying to imagine what it was like around the energy of the 70s. One of the things as the president of the National Organization of Women, for women, you really brought folks together, women together, and to be able to march on Washington, to really have a conversation in a very different way. And can you explain to me kind of about that energy, kind of what was happening around that time?
Well, I had the privilege of leading the first marches in the 70s. I was the president now, and we had to learn how to do a march first place.
Okay.
So we tried with a little one.
All right.
And then our first big one was July of 78. And we had 100,000. But I have to tell you, our biggest marches were not in the 70s and 80s. They were in the 90s, and our largest march was 2004 when we brought over 1 million people for reproductive choice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they kept growing. And I was in the core. I either called the march as the president now, or as a team was in the steering committee of all of them. And they're much bigger events today.
As we transition into the 80s, you wrote a book. It was published in 1984 about the conversation around politics and women.
1984.
1984, around the politics of women. Can you talk a little bit about your book and kind of how that conversation then is still relevant today, or the differences, kind of what you're seeing?
My own research work led me to discover the gender gap, which essentially is that women and men vote differently. And there's a gap on the average. It isn't like all women or all men, but on the average, women see issues differently than men. I think because life experiences are still different, and there's a gap. It's a measurable gap, meaning that about 60% of women are now voting Democratic, for example. It's not just on party, though. It's more on issues. It's driven by issues of Social Security, employment, sex discrimination, education, health care. So anyway, what I said is that gap will eventually elect a woman president, and certainly will help us in electing more people, more women to public office, and will help change the agenda of the nation. Because I think men and women who are candidates have to understand there's a woman's vote. And today everybody knows that. I mean, it's commonplace. But at those times, it was not commonplace.
Well, let's talk about commonplace, because...
I mean, people didn't get it.
Folks often talk about there's been a lot of progression. But I'm also struck by the fact that the majority of the Senate is still men. The majority of the House of Representatives is still men. The conversation...
It's way over a majority.
Yeah.
It's only 17% women.
The conversation around both Palin and Hillary Clinton running for president, I mean, the conversation of gender and sexism seems to still be in play in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
So how far have we come, and how do we address some of the issues that we kind of have now?
Well, it's not an even picture, obviously. We're lagging behind the nation, the world. Would you realize that we're only 71 from the top in representation in our national parliament or Congress, with 17%. A lot of countries now are, in the 30s, 40s, and percentiles. And we are lagging behind in appointments, too. Like right now, our Supreme Court is going to make history, we hope, with 33% women. That'll be the most integration we have at the federal level. But then we have states where we've done much better, some states. For example, New Jersey right now has a woman speaker and a woman president of the Senate. So that in a higher percentage than we do at the federal level. But overall, we're only, something like 24%. Of all the states, but there are states like New Hampshire that we're doing far better, and so we have a long way to go. And part of our problem is a very rigid two-party system. The countries that we are doing far better in have more choices.
Okay.
And the females, we do better because we have a better chance. If we had more of a proportional representation, which means that it wouldn't be winner take all, you would see the numbers of women go way up. But I think they're going to go up anyway. This is very tough under our electoral system, but I think that they will. They're keeping on going up. They're certainly not going down, but they're going way too slow, in my opinion. And part of it's gerrymandering too.
Okay.
Of the districts, you know, the way the district lines are cut.
Correct.
Because they favor incumbents. They favor the club that's in.
And let's talk about that for a little bit. I'm not so sure all of our viewers understand that. So how we draw districts is really based upon, at that particular point, who's in office in some ways when that issue comes forward, correct?
Right, absolutely, because it's in most states it's still being drawn up by the legislature and with the governor. And even those states that have independent commissions, they're appointed by political people. So there's deals cut between the Republicans and the Democrats to make these seats favor essentially incumbents.
One of the things that we know still is that women aren't paid as much as men.
Absolutely.
And we know that in some ways the research over the past few years even shows that women may be losing some money as in comparison to men gaining money. How do we address those issues? How do we have a conversation? Because in some ways those conversations have seemed to go away or not be as loud in some ways.
Well, first place, I think that people have to know the facts, too. We're 77 cents on the dollar, according to the government.
Correct.
In my opinion, if you looked at it by age and gender, you're not doing that well. It's really closer to 60%. Why? Because the gap broadens out as you age. So young people, the difference between men's salaries and women's salaries on the average is not as large. As you get older, it gets bigger because women have less tendencies for promotion. It's tougher. That glass ceiling gets more difficult. Plus, and this is a big deal, is women are still in sex-segregated jobs by and large. Those jobs they're doing are principally what women are doing, and they're underpaid. So we have to fight, and we have to fight very hard, and we've got to strengthen the laws. The laws are still very weak, much weaker on sex than race, but not good on race either. We have to make the laws tougher and enforcement tougher, and we're trying to pass right now 2 laws, the Paycheck Fairness Act and the Fair Pay Act. We just passed the Ledbetter Act, which was essentially, we go forward and back. What happened is they gutted the Supreme Court, which is very right-wing, gutted the Title VII enforcement, made it much more difficult, and we just passed, it was the first law President Obama signed, to restore it. But it wasn't strong enough in the first place. We have got to strengthen it, and the entire women's movement is committed to strengthening those laws.
There seems to be a contradiction in some ways. We want to strengthen laws around race, gender, sexual orientation, folks with disabilities, but we seem to have a political system that favors folks who are white, who are abled, who are male. And so it seems, how do we partner? How do we use our own leverage as ordinary Americans to make some of those things happen?
Well, that's what's happening, really, is that it's coalition work. The women's movement works very closely with the civil rights movement, with the Latino movement, with labor, with the gay and lesbian movement. So, and we are the majority. There's no question. Underrepresented in decision making, but that is going to change. And they're making a very, in my opinion, this should be not a divisive issue. No one benefits from discrimination. No one. White men don't either.
I agree.
And we frankly, who benefits is businesses, large businesses, ripping off people, using things. I was very amazed in the recent healthcare debate. Finally, we've only been fighting this for over 30 years, the insurance companies admitted that they were charging different prices for males and females. And of course, women were paying more, 48% on the average. Do you know how long it's taken us for them to get it admitted? But we also got it changed. This is the beginning of changing that. When the new act gets fully enforced by 2014, Gendered pricing, which is cheating women,
Right.
is going to be eliminated in individual policies and policies for companies under 100, and it's going to spread because I think a lot of people don't know, in this healthcare reform bill, there is a Title IX. There is a non-discrimination clause on race, sex, ethnicity, marital status. It's quite broad, and so I'm hoping that we will, in fact, see the beginning of the end in insurance discrimination, and that's important. That's one of the fringe benefits that we've been cheated on.
Right. One of the things that I find also very interesting is the conversation you brought up earlier, the issue of the glass ceiling. First, can you kind of give me a reference of where the glass ceiling came from? Because I think it's important to the conversation. And also the reality of, have we broken through part of it? I think there's a large assumption that we, have smashed the glass ceiling with two presidential or vice presidential candidates potentially in the run who are women. And so can we talk just a little bit about the notion of the glass ceiling, where it came from, and kind of where we are today?
Well, the glass ceiling is sort of a concept that you can sort of see the top,
right?
But there's a ceiling you can't get there. That there's a different track for women.
Okay.
And Hillary Clinton is proud to say that she put 18 million cracks into it with her run for president. And by the way, is doing a fantastic job as Secretary of State, constantly bringing up women's rights, constantly furthering women's rights internationally. Just did it this week for the Afghan woman. So there are cracks now. I mean, Dean of Harvard Law School, President of Harvard Law School, right now a Solicitor General, going to be the third Supreme Court appointment. But still, if you look at it overall, we're a handful of the Fortune 500 presidents, et cetera. And it's, even though we're now, roughly half of the law school, we're still underrepresented in the judiciary, underrepresented in senior partners, in partners of law firms. So there's a long way to go. I mean, it isn't, this is a real fight. In every profession, by the way, there's no exceptions.
The thing I'm probably most struck about is the conversation of looking at this realistically and then looking at television. I think, as our viewers look at, they see, the conversation of women represented in television news, women represented in terms of storylines, women represented in terms of lots of different things on television. However, I also think there's a contradiction in terms of how women are presented and depicted. So how does media kind of impact our ability to have these conversations?
It still impacts it so big. I mean, if we could all, you can be what you can imagine almost. One of the reasons it's so important, really, that you have a Secretary of State, and we've had it now in three different presidents, that's a woman, that you see women in leadership, is more young women can imagine it. You can imagine now a woman president. When I was a young woman, you couldn't imagine. You couldn't even imagine a woman senator. I mean, let's be real here. Barbara Mikulski from Maryland was the first woman who was elected in her own right. To the Senate. So, but now you can. But the media still depicts us frequently in a very stereotypic way, a very trivialized way. Makes us victims rather than being full adults. So it's harmful. But I think in the long run, more and more you can see that women we're part of the world. We should have half the decision making, right? And so it's improving, but it isn't what it should be.
When we're talking about the glass ceiling and the conversation about that, Fortune 500 companies and the top Fortune 500 companies, we're still well underrepresented in terms of women who provide leadership to those companies. And some of the women who've provided leadership to those companies have been a lot under attack. So how do we have a conversation around that? I mean,
well, one of the things that's happening is the growth in the market has been small businesses. Which women are growing, are the leaders of it by far. It's where the doors are opening. And what's happened is women are educated, have more self-confidence, and they won't take being treated second class. So they go out and start their own businesses. So that's something that I don't think people expected. that there's such a large entrepreneurial class now of women. But there's no question that in the big ones, it's been very, very hard to crack. And I feel that one of the things I've learned is, and I didn't realize this when we first started. I'll give you police officers.
Okay.
When we started trying to integrate police forces, we were only 1% of the police officers. Now what we've learned is, as we go in, we also change the culture of policing.
That's true.
So that the police officers or women respond to domestic violence better than men police officers, okay? So as we become more in the managerial and the decision-making processes of business, we also change those businesses.
Correct.
They are more responsive to half the population. And so I think sometimes, that some of these businesses are either going to have to change or they become dinosaurs. And if you notice, like in car marketing, it used to be, automobile marketing used to be all towards men. Well, now we know that women are buying half the cars, so this is ridiculous. So I do think that some of it's going to change simply for survival.
Okay.
But I also believe it's a fight. And anybody that thinks that we don't need a movement now, they don't understand where it's at. We need a movement to break down the doors. And I think that one of the other things that we're doing now is that we're organizing worldwide. I don't know if you realize that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the foundation, because I think that's kind of what you're speaking to in some ways. So why don't you give us an overview of the foundation, what the mission is, and the projects you've been kind of spearheading and involved with around the globe?
Well, we're for equal representation and all the things we just said. We have projects in about 12 major projects, but we also have a global focus. So we've been involved in the fight, for example, for Afghan women right from the beginning, since the Taliban took over in 1996, and we're still there. I was just at the State Department meeting with the women ministers on Friday, so from Afghanistan. So basically, we are determined that the United States passes the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Sex Discrimination of the United Nations, which is a treaty. We're the only modern industrialized country that has not passed it. It is not good for the women worldwide, and it's not good for our own. It's not good for our own reputation. Are we for universal human rights? Are we for women's rights? Well, why don't we say it? It should be ratified by the Senate, and it would greatly improve the rights of women worldwide, because we're still the most powerful country. So we work worldwide with other women's groups, and that's been very inspiring. We have a huge campus program. We're in 44 states. We're on over 400 campuses, forming women's rights groups, and very excited about that. And we publish Ms. Magazine. We've gone digital too, but women's studies is one of the most exciting things happening on campus, and it's, Ph.D.s right here at Rutgers is now in women's studies, M.A.s. You have over 2,000 women and men in your women's studies program. So whoever had that when I was a kid didn't exist, right? So they learn a lot about how do you get to equality, what does it mean, and how do you change institutions.
I'm curious. I want to go back and explore something you said. The United States is the only industrialized nation who hasn't voted on the treaty or hasn't passed the treaty, from our perspective. What holds us up from doing that? It's the Senate.
The Senate has been, you need 67 votes in the Senate. And we've had a very divided nation. And so if one party wants it, the other one doesn't want it. And as a result, getting to 67 has been a mountain, because the votes are, right now the Democrats have 59 votes in the Senate. They don't even really have that many. They have to have 2 independents. And people have got to start crossing party lines more. I mean, this country has more viewpoints than just 2. And so that's it's the process. And then the other thing is, one senator, can you imagine this, in this country that's so vibrant, 300 million people, so important for the world, one senator can block a piece of legislation. So for years, For absolute years, Jesse Helms sat on the piece of legislation because he was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. But he didn't even have to be chair. You can block a piece of legislation if you're one person, one senator, and just a handful can stop consideration. So it doesn't even get to the floor. It hasn't been voted on.
Okay.
I mean, this is ridiculous. And it isn't just this piece of legislation. It's huge areas that we just don't deal with. We haven't passed the Treaty on the Children. We haven't passed environmental treaties. We still haven't dealt with landmines.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. And it doesn't make us look good worldwide. We look very hypocritical.
Let's talk a little bit about your connection with Rutgers. You've been interactive with the Eagleton Institute in terms of politics and conversation around women. And tomorrow, you're receiving one of our honorary degrees.
Yes, I'm very, very grateful for that. That's quite, it's really a tribute to the women's movement.
Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with Eagleton, kind of what you've been doing with them, or kind of how you've come on campus to interact with them?
Well, Eagleton is very important. It is the largest center for women in politics, the COP, the Center for American Women and Politics. Right. And it's been there since 1971. It's been a real trailblazer. And they recognized the gender gap very early. They've encouraged women running for office literally all over this nation, and have played a marvelous role. Their data and statistics are definitive. And you can just go on their site. They can tell you where women are, women of color as well as white women. But it's more than that. They have been a galvanizer for women, increasing the numbers of women in the state legislatures, in appointed offices, etc. So, and the leadership of Ruth Mandel as a trailblazer is quite marvelous.
We have just a few minutes left, and in this last minute we have left, what is your hope for women as you start to head into the second decade of the 21st century?
My hope is equality always, and that we can make our full use of our full potential and contributions, and that we can face the real challenges of the 21st century, the climate change challenges, the challenges of hunger, the challenges of a lack of water, together as a people, and our talents are fully utilized. And
I want to kind of piggyback on something you said, that is the fact that we can't do it just one person at a time. It really is a coalition.
No, we can't do it one person at a time. We have to do it together with many, many groups working for social justice and against the humongous problems of our times. And we have to take people's talent and them as they are, not stereotyping people, not trying to keep people in a box, but to work together. And that's why I think, Rutgers has played a marvelous role, by the way, in the area of women. Not only the Center for in politics, but also, and I'm going to say this in my speech tomorrow, keynote, you've had 8 units working for women in research and breaking through. But also you've been working in other areas that are so important. So I'm hoping, frankly, I think that it is universities like this that gives me encouragement, because we have such a large, diverse, now educated population. Roughly 50% of our public is now going to college. So when I look at the youth, and I have to tell you this, because a lot of people say, oh, are you discouraged? No, I'm not. I feel that we have the most talented people coming up who really do get the whole picture and will make tremendous changes.
With that said, we're going to end right there. I want to thank you for coming on. It's been an honor to meet you, so thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.